What's going on, everyone? Network Wizkid here, and today I wanted to bring you a new video to give you an update as to where I've been, why I haven't really been uploading too many videos as of recent, and mainly to share with you 5 key points that I now have realized having taken the CCIE Security Lab exam recently. So the reason I haven't been uploading too many videos as of recent is purely because of that. I've been really trying to focus on getting everything that I felt that I needed down in regards to CCIE security topics. So as you can see here, and this is an Excel sheet that I've shared with the community, I essentially put all the blueprint topics into an Excel sheet, and the plan was to really go through each or at least most of these topics before my CCIE Security Lab exam. Now, granted that this does need updating, I haven't really stuck to kind of logging everything in here, which I should have done. So I will be looking at updating this now for my personal use. Again, if this is something that you would like to download, it should be available on my website, networkwizkid.com, under resources, so do check that out. But essentially, I was spending quite a lot of time going through these topics in preparation for the lab exam, and so much so I actually took a week off work a couple of weeks ago in order to really focus on just purely labbing, and I did that. I spent essentially from Monday to Sunday labbing a lot. And when I say a lot, I think one particular day, I think I worked out that I labbed around 16 hours straight, which some might think is crazy, some might think is not healthy, and in hindsight it was a lot, and I would probably look at kind of managing that time a little bit better in the future. But at the time, I had the time available, and I felt it was appropriate in order for me to try and understand and configure different elements related to the blueprint as possible in the little time that I had before my my exam. Looking back on that, I think, as I said, I probably wouldn't spend that much time doing that again, because I think what I found is that labbing so many different things at once, you can sometimes find yourself getting a little bit muddled up, or for lack of a better word, confused as to kind of which configuration relates to a specific topic. An example would be, I was configuring Flex VPN, so I was configuring static VTIs as well as dynamic VTIs, and then I was doing DMVPN, I did Get VPN, and there's some elements from within those different VPNs that are kind of similar, or if not pretty much the same, when you're configuring them. And I think because I spent so much time straight without kind of taking a break, just focusing on them, I don't really think, yes, I learned more, but I don't really think I took in as much as I could, as opposed to if I kind of just walked away and then came back and revisited topics, or kind of studied one VPN topic, took a break, and then maybe went on to something else before doing another VPN topic as well. So, in hindsight, I think that's kind of what I found, and next time I'll probably do it slightly different. Nevertheless, so the CCIE Security Lab exam date came, and it came quick. I was rather nervous, as one would expect, and I had to fly to Krakow in Poland because that's where I was actually taking the lab exam. I did try to look for an exam in London in the UK so that I didn't have to fly, and it just make things a little bit easier. However, those that have kind of booked CCIE labs will probably realise that, especially with mobile labs, they're kind of few and far between. So with London being a kind of mobile location, yeah, my chances of kind of getting a lab date there was very, very scarce. So I ended up booking Krakow because they had one seat available, and it was around the date that I felt like I wanted to take the exam as well. And the flight timings and stuff like that you have to consider, because you know at the end of the day you need to make sure that you have enough time to rest, you have enough time to do any final preparations, and you have enough time to actually catch up with sleep if that's a requirement, in order to be prepared as possible for the exam. So I had to take all them things into consideration. Also, flight timings were quite important, because I wanted to try and get there on the same day, but leave myself enough time in order to, you know, do some last-minute preparations before the exam day. So Krakow, in comparison to the UK, was 1 hour ahead in terms of time. So it wasn't that bad at all. In fact, it's barely noticeable, to be honest with you. I was familiar with Krakow. It was at the Cisco Krakow office. I was familiar with it because I used to work there, I used to live there, so that kind of made things a little bit easier for me. Nevertheless, like I say, I was still nervous, but I think the fact that I was familiar, at least, with certain things made it a little bit more bearable. It kind of eased the nerves a little bit more, so that was nice. But nevertheless, like I say, as the morning came and I was on my way to the office to start the exam, the nerves slowly just crept up, and by the time I got to the office, I kind of found myself drinking water, drinking coffee, and just my head was all over the place. Obviously, knowing that I'm going into this this exam for 8 hours, and you know, with it something that I really wanted to achieve, I think it made the nerves a lot more worse as well. So I got into the exam and kind of got told about the kind of process, the procedures and whatnot that I had to follow, how the exam would kind of work. And I started the exam, 8 hours exam, split up into 2 sections. So you've got a 3-hour design part, and then you have a 5-hour lab part. And honestly, I used to think that 8 hours is a long time for an exam, but now, having sat the CCIE exam, you actually realize that it's not really a lot of time, given what you have to achieve in that time. So I started with the design section, as you would, and before you know it, the 3 hours was pretty much up, and I've managed to complete everything that I needed to do within the allotted time, so I felt quite good. But like I say, I started to realise that the time that you do have is actually not a lot. I took a quick break to get a drink and go to the toilet and stuff like that. And then I started the 5-hour section, which was all around configuration. I feel like I started off well, and I believe after we stopped for lunch and came back to the exam, I soon began to realize that time was running out quickly, and I had to face the fact that I probably wouldn't finish in the allotted time, because I think as time kind of went on and I was configuring and troubleshooting and looking at different stuff, I realized that there was still quite a lot to do, and in the time that I had remaining, it probably wasn't going to be possible, or at least with accuracy, in order to get that pass mark. So again, time crept up in the second part, and this time it kind of got me, and I finished the exam. The time ran out and I didn't really get to finish some of the tasks that I still had left to do. So that was that. So I pretty much knew that I had failed, because obviously I had outstanding tasks that I still needed to do, and the time had finished. However, I walked out of the exam with my head held high, and I felt pretty good. And the reason I say that is because of the very fact that I was actually now at this level of sitting CCIE lab exams. So I felt good in that respect, that I've kind of got to that level now. I just need to pass this final phase in order to get my CCIE security and to get my CCIE number. And I also felt good because I felt like the lab was definitely achievable, and all I had to really do was adjust my approach to taking the exam in order to have the best chance of succeeding and getting my number. Everything I felt like in the exam that I did, for me, and the studies that I've done, was achievable. Again, I felt like I just needed to jiggle a few things around, change my approach to taking the exam, change my strategy, and then go again. So I didn't really feel too bad. Obviously I was slightly gutted that I didn't pass, because everybody goes into an exam, or most people go into an exam wanting to pass. But at the same time, I know how difficult these exams are at the CCIE level. So I kind of had, in my mind, I knew that I wanted to pass, but I knew that there was a possibility that I wouldn't pass, at least the first time anyway. So that was that. I kind of just enjoyed the rest of the day that I had left. Went out and got some food in Krakow, and the very next day I came back to the drawing board, if you like, to start to write notes and kind of to pick up where I left off, write notes around where I feel like I need to improve based on what I saw in the exam and stuff like that, and readjust some of my lab elements to kind of focus on kind of focus more on the aspects that I kind of came across in the lab. So that was that, and I think the more time I had to think about the whole process and actually sit in the lab exam, I came up with 5 key points that I wanted to share with anybody that's either looking at taking the CCIE security exam, and it's probably, some of these points probably are relevant for other CCIE exams as well, so that you hopefully take them on board and use them to your advantage in trying to go in there and pass the first time. Now, obviously these points are kind of what I have put together based on what I felt and my experiences with the exam. Others that go into the CCIE exam might be able to come up with different points, or they, they might have other areas where they felt like they needed to focus on. But as I say, these are my key points, and I wanted to share these 5 points with you to make your life hopefully a little bit easier. So I'm going to start off with 5 and go all the way down to number 1. And so the first one, or number 5, is that one thing that I tried to do before my exam was to try and memorize all of the commands or the processes in order to configure certain features, etc., that were required as part of the blueprint. Especially when it comes to like ASAs or routers and switches, where you need to spend more time on the CLI. I tried to, the more I configured, the more I tried to kind of memorize the processes and the exact configurations that were required. Now, I'm here to tell you with this 5th point that you don't have to memorize or even try to memorize all the commands. And the reason why is because there's a little caveat there actually, but I'll go into that after. But the reason why is because in the CCIE exam, you actually get access to the Cisco documentation. So you can easily kind of go on there and look for what you need in order to remember that specific command that you may have forgot, or the process, etc., and then go ahead and configure it in the lab. Now, the caveat to that is that you still need to understand what it is that you need to configure in order to, if you want to use the documentation, in order to find what it is that you need to configure. And then the second caveat is probably time. As I said, you don't really have that time to be spending too much time looking at documentation, trying to find the relevant configuration in order to configure what it is that you need to do. So if you are going to take that approach, I would highly recommend that you keep an eye on the clock, because you can easily get carried away in the documentation, get bogged down looking for things, and then before you know it, you've kind of wasted 10 minutes trying to find a specific command. So although you don't need to memorize all the commands, it is definitely worth going through the blueprint and labbing as much as possible and getting familiar with the different topics. Number 4. So one thing that I did in the run-up to my first attempt at the CCIE Security Lab was spend an awful lot of time on configuration. That's good, but at the same time, do not neglect anything that relates to design. So if we look at, there's a section in the blueprint, so things around security policies and compliance, etc. So this section here, don't neglect that, because obviously they're not configuration topics. They're more about understanding and reading the policies and compliance and etc. etc. So do make sure you have a good overview of these parts that are in the blueprint topic. And there's also another part. If I can find it, let's do a search. There we go, it's right there. So there's also this part, Cisco Safe, which is basically architectural designs on how to implement Cisco solutions and recommended and best practice designs for different network flows within an environment. So again, this part, it's not configuration per se, it's more about understanding Cisco safe and architectural designs, etc, etc. Now, I'll admit it, I spent a short amount of time looking through this, but not as much as time as I should have done, and therefore in the design section I feel like I didn't do as well. So definitely do not neglect design, because it's important. It's just as important as the configuration aspect as well. So do spend time trying to understand that as well. Number 3, the blueprint is your friend. So this is essentially the blueprint that you're looking at now. What I've done is I've actually extracted the blueprint and put it into a fancy Excel sheet here. So what do I mean by the blueprint is your friend? Well, you have the topics, the percentages in terms of what you're going to be assessed on in the blueprint. So it would be wise for one to really use the blueprint as a guide to start configuring or understanding certain topics that you may not be familiar with a little bit more. The way I did it was to go through each of these topics top to bottom. Well, that was at least the intention, where I had access to lab facilities and could configure these things. But I understand not everybody may have a lab or can actually get access to all of the equipment in order to configure things. So what I would recommend is do some reading. The Cisco documentation definitely covers all these elements. If you have access to labs at work, do get access to labs so that you can try and configure things. If you've just got a personal PC, try and get Cisco CML or EVE-NG virtual environments where you can actually spin up labs and configure labs to try and do some of these topics. And I would go so far as to say, if you have the funds, get yourself a server, or spend money on cloud resources in order to configure some of these elements and get more familiar with these things, because it will really help when you come to doing your lab exam. Number 2. Now, this is one thing that really kind of stuck with me when I finished my first attempt at the lab, and that was to just do the tasks as asked. Don't do anything fancy, don't do anything more, don't do anything less than what is required. Just do what the task says. Now, when I was in the lab, and this is, by the way, why I lost some time here and why I believe I ran out of time. When I was doing the lab, I started off nice, everything was going good, I had a good feeling, and then I kind of stumbled as I came to troubleshooting a few things, which really I shouldn't have even been spending time looking at. And this is kind of what got me a little bit. I spent time looking at logs that were not necessarily relevant, and that kind of led to me having to look at other potential issues and stuff like that, and I kind of just got bogged down in the unnecessary. The second point was, when I was configuring things, I was configuring as though I was deploying for a real customer. So and I laugh a little bit now, because I was trying to be not as fancy as possible, but I was trying to have the perfect configuration. And that's just not required, because trying to have the perfect configuration in a 5-hour span is going to be impossible. I spent too much time trying to make things perfect, and I started to realize that it's not really required. Just do the task, get in and get out, sort of thing. And this is what kind of shot me down a little bit, I feel like, as well. So definitely for my next attempt, I will be just doing what the tasks tell me to do, and no more or no less. So lastly, the big one for me at least is that time is key. I alluded to that at the very start of this video and throughout the video. Time is key. You may think that 8 hours is a long time, and I certainly went into the exam thinking 8 hours is more than enough time for me to be able to configure everything and do things the way that I wanted to do things. And I can assure you that it's not. And yes, of course, the lab is achievable within 8 hours. I want to stress that. But it's important that you go in with the right attitude and the right strategy in order to get through that 8 hours and successfully complete everything. The points that I've pointed out already were factors that made me run out of time, essentially. So as I said earlier, I am strategizing at the moment to try and come up with a way that I believe will work for me to get through the exam in that allotted time quicker. But what I would say is stick to what is being asked, and don't spend too much time on unnecessary things. Don't spend too much time overthinking, because overthinking and spending too much time on unnecessary things is definitely going to make you run out of time, as it did for me. I think one thing that I kind of took away as well on top of that was that you don't necessarily have to configure in any specific order. When you start the configuration section, it doesn't say configure, start with number 1 and work your way down until you get to the end. Now, obviously you can do that. That's totally up to you. But as I got through each of the topics, I realized that some of the things I was a little bit more familiar with configuring, and literally took me less than 5 minutes to configure, I should have really focused on them at the first time, instead of spending time going through topics that I was maybe less familiar with, or topics that required a little bit more time and thinking. If I'd got the easier stuff out of the way, for me personally, I feel like I would have had more time to focus on the areas that maybe needed a little bit more time in, and probably would have managed to complete all, if not most, of the tasks as well. So for me, time was the thing that I feel like got me the fail in the end. So I think, to sum it up, for me, I will take all 5 of those points on board, and at the moment I'm currently just looking at what I feel is the best way to approach my second attempt. I hope you found that useful, and anybody that's taken the CCIE Security Lab recently, if you have any additional points, feel free to comment. in the comment section, or share kind of you know, how you found the exam, whether you passed or failed as well. And anybody that's watching this and is probably going to be taking the exam soon, I wish you nothing but luck. I hope these points really help, and I'd be interested in hearing your experiences as well, whether you pass or fail. And just on the failing, in fact, I wanted to... So I made a post on Twitter, kind of just letting all my followers know that I'd taken the lab exam, I failed, and now I need to go back to the drawing board to look at another way to try and get my number. And one thing that never fails to amaze me is the fact that people don't really expect you to share your failures. Now, I've got a lot of certifications, I've got my degrees, etc., and I think often people are under the illusion that everything is just success. They kind of disregard the path that it takes in order for you to actually achieve those successes, and the failures along the way. And I'm not one to share with my followers and wider community just my successes, because that's not in reality how it is. I want to be able to share with you my failures as well as my successes, so that when I do fail, you acknowledge that and realize that, you know, there is hard work that is required behind this, and not necessarily saying that I've not done the hard work already and still failed, because, you know, I have worked really hard and I've been working in security for a number of years now. It's just one of those things. But I just want to kind of make people aware, especially those that are, you know, early in career or transitioning into IT, that it's not all about successes. You know, it's the failures that define people, and it's the failures that make the successes even more rewarding. So I'll continue to share my failures as well as my successes, so that when I do succeed, especially with the CCIE, you can hopefully see and understand the journey that has been taken in order to achieve that. So yeah, I just kind of really wanted to call that out, and I want to thank everybody for their appreciations and you know, reaching out to me on Twitter, and yeah, I continue to grind, I continue to lab, and one day I will get my CCIE number and I will pass my CCIE Security Lab. I have looked for a new date already. However, I did try to, in fact, I did actually book my second attempt the day after I returned from doing my first attempt. And that was to be done in a mobile lab in London. However, that's been cancelled now because there's some work that's happening at that specific location on those specific dates. So unfortunately, I have to now look for another date. I didn't really want to fly again because it just takes up time and, you know, all the rest of it that I didn't want to have to do. But it looks like now, if I want to take another crack at this lab this year, I probably will have to fly now to either Brussels or maybe Krakow again in order to do this exam. So I am currently on the lookout for exam dates. I am in the meantime going to, as I say, continue to strategize, get my plan in place, continue to lab once I've modified my lab slightly, and yeah, hopefully the second time round I can get my number and I'll be sharing my success with you. But until then, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I really do hope you find it useful, and if you are going for the lab exam, I really do hope that you take this on board and you can succeed in getting your number 2. Thank you for watching.